Hi all, and welcome to our new lecture on score matching and diffusion generative models. So in today's lecture, we're going to introduce, first of all, score matching, what it stands for, its basic principles. Next, we're going to discuss about the noise conditional score networks, which were shown to work pretty well with a score matching objective. We're going to further present the score-based generation with stochastic differential equations that improved significantly and scaled up the noise conditional score networks. And in the end, we're going to also present diffusion models, which is another family of generative models that resembles a lot score matching, score-based generative models, and there exist some interesting parallels between the two. So in this lecture, much of the material will be discussed will come from Yang Chong's GitHub blog. So far, in generative models, we know that there are two opposing forces. On one hand, we have tractability, and on the other hand, we have flexibility. So tractable generative models are usually analytically computable, which means that because of this property, they can be easily trained. We can easily fit them to data. We can easily evaluate and sample from them. However, tractable models are usually not flexible enough to fit interesting data structures. So whereas they might work pretty well on toy data or on simple data, when we scale up to larger and more complex data sets, they are not good enough. On the other hand, we have flexible models, which in theory could approximate very interesting data structures. However, this flexibility comes at the cost of being too expensive to evaluate, fit, or sample from. Basically, they are intractable. The main two families of generative models we've seen so far is likelihood-based generative models and implicit generative models. Let's see how they fit into the trade-off of tractability versus flexibility. Likelihood-based generative models typically make strong assumptions so that they become tractable. Specifically, we're mostly interested about the normalizing constant usually in generative models, so we have to make sure that the normalizing constant is tractable to compute. For instance, VAEs, variational autoencoders, assume a tractable variational approximation. You cannot really compute the true posterior, and therefore you assume an approximate posterior with variational impedance. Autoregressive models assume causal convolutions. Normalizing flows require invertibility in the network architecture, so we have to constrain the types of architectures, the types of nonlinearities we're having, so that we have invertibility guaranteed, like that we can hard code and make sure that we can compute normalizing flows. Now, this doesn't mean that these are bad models, not at all. Normalizing flows work pretty well. Autoregressive models also work pretty well. However, they are not as general as they could be. We also have implicit generative models like generative adversarial neural networks. Adversarial training for implicit generative models is known to be quite unstable, so it doesn't work always that consistently. Adversarial training also leads to mode collapses and reduced variance in sampling. And importantly, implicit generative models cannot compute likelihood of a sample. They just, you just sample from them, but you cannot really compute its likelihood, how likely that sample is. And that's why in their traditional form, in their original form, generative adversarial networks were not possible to do. They were not possible to be used for representation learning. You could just sample from them. You could not have an encoder to map an input observation onto a latent data space. In this lecture, we're going to discuss a third family of energy-based models, more specifically score-based and diffusion generative models. And These models are quite interesting because in the late years they've been shown that they're both tractable and flexible. This means that we can easily, or relatively easily, compute them, evaluate them, train them, sample from them, while being quite flexible to fit complex and interesting data structures, even when we scale up to big and hard data sets. And that's what we're going to discuss next.